You're going to start
Hello
now.
and welcome everyone to IHAQ number 9. It is June on this side of the world. The summer is starting for those of you who are entering winter. I'm sorry that that's going on for you, but it's nice up here. We're enjoying it. My name's Dave Cormier and I'm in Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island.
And my name is Jennifer Madrill in Chicago, Illinois.
And my name is John Schinker and I'm in Stowe, Ohio.
And I am Jeff Lebo in Busan, Korea. Our late-breaking question comes from Rhizo14. So, Dave, why don't you tell us what it is?
This comes from Ronald Rudolph. The question, he's talking about blended learning. And he wants to know if people have experience with mixing face-to-face conversations with online conversations that actually worked. What he's specifically interested in is how do you do blended learning in a face-to-face campus? So if students are seeing each other every day, how do you do the online learning, the blended part of the online learning stuff, or the face-to-face learning stuff, where it's actually meaningful, where it's not just you must post 3 things today and people going to post, but really, frankly, would prefer to go and talk to each other face-to-face. So how do you make, broadly speaking, how do you make the online part of blended learning meaningful? Jen.
That's so funny. Just a little backstory. I told them I could not answer this question because I do not work with face-to-face students. I have the opposite, where I have online students, and then I try to find things they can do in the real world with real people. So I will allow someone else to take a first crack at this question.
I can jump in from a K-12 perspective, and I don't work with students. I hardly work with students at all anymore. But my take on it is that if the blended portion of the class is somehow different from the face-to-face class, that you can do both. For instance, I'm thinking English class or science class where a teacher's teaching 4 or 5 sections of the same course, and the students who are in those various sections don't necessarily interact with one another in a face-to-face environment. Sure, they're in the same school and they're in classes together and they know each other, but they're not engaging around the conversations for that course. You know, they're in a science class and they're doing labs in the science class, or they're you know, they're working on problems or projects in class, but the conversations that are going on in the online community are different from those happening in the class and may involve different participants. So from a scheduling perspective, I could see it working. Now, whether you can get students to engage in those conversations depends on how relevant you make them. And you know, that's part of the tricky part about education in general is how do we make this relevant for our students and get them to want to come instead of just saying, oh, I need to check off my 3 posts and my 4 comments this week.
Yeah, I guess that would be the question for pretty much everything we do is, like, to what end? Like, if you just have them posting to a discussion board so you have something to grade for a participation grade, or something like that, that's a little silly. But if there's actually something that they can get out of the experience, then it's worth designing something worthwhile to do. So I guess I guess I'd have a follow-up question to our question is, what types of activity was he seeing that he found I think that there was a second part of his question or commentary was that he didn't find it to be particularly valuable, right? Or at least the students kind of defined the face-to-face experience as more valuable than what they got out of the online piece, right?
Well, I didn't read all of that, but my take on it was that if the students can get together face-to-face, they would prefer to do that. So if you're going to create an online community and you have students in an actual blended environment where they're meeting in class and on Tuesdays and Thursdays and then the rest in this online thing, that they would rather just get together and talk about whatever the prompt is or the topic is instead of going into an online forum and doing it there. Is that accurate, Dave?
Yeah, that's right.
That if they actually can't get together, in Jennifer's case, you're dealing with people who are all over the world, that's a very different scenario because you can't get a face-to-face meeting together, but where you can, they do and prefer to do that.
See, what's so interesting about this question, which I'm going to totally hijack the question for a moment, is that everyone I teach or work with is purposely in an online class because they prefer online interactions to going down the street to their local college. Like I started my online program when I was living in Manhattan and had countless colleges I could have attended, but I wanted to engage in the online experience for whatever my personal reasons were. So most of the people I interact with prefer the online. So I just found parts of the question a little interesting. So I guess that's why I'm interested in hearing what people have to say that actually do work more with face-to-face students who just dabble in the online environment.
Well,
'Cause I
I'm
found
one
it
of
kind
those
of an interesting
people.
question.
I actually
Yeah,
work with
here.
face-to-face people, and I dabble in the online world. And I would expand online to include mobile, because I think it's important to meet students where they are. Here in Korea, we use something called Kakao. And so for each of my courses, I have a group chat for my class. And sometimes I will use this in a class and use it as like a game show tool, because I mean, they're all on their phones anyway. I will use this as homework reminders, or when they have a question, what does this do? So that's been a very useful thing, because everyone in Korea uses Kakao, and it's a very friendly to group chatting. There are other things you could use. I don't know if WhatsApp supports group chatting. You could use Google Hangouts for that. You could use Skype for that. But that's the first thing that comes to my mind. And I have found it very useful to have them just posting not all of their assignments, but I've had them this semester creating a blog. And so some people do the bare minimum and do what they have to. Others, I get feedback and get to know those students in ways that I never would have were they not posting that. And if you give an open-ended enough assignment, things come out that just wouldn't come out in a face-to-face group. The shy kid, goes on and on about something that they never would in class. Another thing I'll mention about the group chatting is that not only for curriculum-based material, but for social bonding, I find it, I've had to set some parameters sometimes, because they'll just go on and on. What are you doing tonight? I'm going to this club. I'm going to that club, which has been great for social bonding. But I've almost encouraged two groups. Like, there's the official class group chat, and then there's the hangout, talk about whatever you want chat.
Right.
I think for me, one of the things that I tend to do with my students is try to deconstruct the idea that face-to-face is particularly efficient. I mean, I do this in meetings as well, where I'll sit there next to people and write out stuff and actually start building the report while we're talking. And they're like, well, what are you doing on your laptop? I'm like, I'm doing the work that we actually have to get done here. Why don't you open your laptop, and then we'll get this done while we're sitting here. And I'll do that in my face-to-face classrooms, and I'll do two successive assignments. One where 4 people all gather around together and try to build some effort that they're doing. And then the next time I run, I'll say, no, this time don't come together. Open up a Google Doc between you and sit at your relative computers, and let's just try it that way. And inevitably, the second way goes a lot faster and is a lot more efficient than the first way. And I try to explain, look, there are things that the internet will never replace. There's a way in which we can understand each other face-to-face. There's great power to the face-to-face classroom. But for the most part, having 4 or 5 people in a room together talking about something is incredibly inefficient in terms of actually getting the work done. So what I try to encourage is do your sort of speculative brainstorming planning together, where you can bounce ideas off each other really easily. But when it actually comes down to work, even if you're in the same room together, break out some of those online skills that can actually help you get the work done. And I think that, like I try to do with a lot of the change management stuff that I do, convincing people that it's faster and easier can often lead them to being willing to take some of those approaches on.
Yeah.
I think that's an important point, too, that I'm hearing from some of my teachers, is that as they continue down this path of blended, they're moving away from discussion forums and saying, yes, they're okay, but they do tend to be forced, and so what is it that they're doing in the blended environment? What are they doing online? And that's the collaborative piece. It is formative assessments. It's keeping track of which students have met certain requirements or met certain standards, and so they're using the tools in different ways than we had initially envisioned. 20 years ago we were talking about let's create forums so that people can participate in discussions, and we're kind of moving away from that and doing other stuff now. So I guess it depends on what part is the face-to-face part and what part is the blended part.
I think, too, we've talked about it a little bit here, but I think people are also getting a little weary of all the discussion forums. So every new experience you have, there's a new discussion forum set up. And so, for example, in my service learning project, we started a Google Plus community. We had asynchronous discussion boards, and it was just dead quiet. Nobody, it's just, they preferred to use email for the most part, and they didn't really want to take the time to, in some respects, repeat what they were talking about within their groups to then share it out there, because the idea was they were working in teams, and then it would be neat to hear what the teams were doing, so we had spaces for things like that. And it probably also ties back to my original point, to what end? If they didn't find any value in sharing with each other what they were doing on their projects, then they're not going to do it, regardless of
that also goes back to
or in person. But
that also goes back to the conversation we were having last week about Facebook, and does it make sense to have all those conversations in the same place where you're already interacting with your online community, which may consist of people from all these other circles? So instead of having 15 forums that you're part of, you have one. And the ecosystem in Google would make more sense if we could get 1 billion people to move over there. Then you have different circles, and hey, this conversation belongs in these 4 communities that I'm in, but we don't have the people there. So maybe something like Facebook, where we're bringing our communities into our existing social networking ecosystem instead of the other way around.
Yeah, and
So
I think Jeff.
Okay.
I think Jeff was saying last week too that one of his concerns about platforms was that he wanted the conversation to be able to persist when it was done. And I think that I feel the same way, and I've been thinking about what he was saying last week and how a lot of my practice has moved away, even without realizing why I was frustrated, away from those kinds of artificially structured discussions. So a discussion forum is a terrible artificial way of having a discussion. I think it's a really nice way of doing like a process essay, but I don't think it actually is a discussion forum in that sense. So I think that I agree in finding increasingly that where meaningful things happen are where they are going to persist.
Yeah. Peggy posted an interesting comment. I think there's a difference between posting what you're doing and learning and participating in a discussion about it. And this goes back to me when I read that early discussions about having students do blogging activities, which originally was very much of a broadcast activity. It's like an opportunity to reflect on something and then broadcast that reflection to others. And yeah, you maybe had like a little bit of commentary in the comments at the bottom, but not as much. Then Twitter came along, and even more, Facebook or whatever, and then it's more of a conversation or a dialogue versus a broadcast. And I think that kind of gets to Peggy's point, is posting about what you're doing and learning is more, to me, of a broadcast of your reflection versus talking to others about it. And maybe that the forum needs to be different. And maybe this ties into our conversation tonight, but how many people still on this call still require your students to do a blog? Because I know when I was a student, that was all the rage. You had to.
For some courses, I do, and I think it's the blending part is important. Like I taught a cross-cultural communication course, and we would discuss a topic. It's a 3-hour graduate level course, so we discuss it for 3 hours in class, and then their assignment would be to go write some kind of reflection. And especially for non-native English speakers, it takes time to process thoughts, and you had interesting discussions in class, so they'd go and they'd post a reflection on their blog, but usually the first 30 minutes of the next class would be discussing some of those reflections. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't just a reflection on that, it was sort of taking it wherever they wanted to take it. And the fact that, okay, then we would discuss it, oh, did you see what so-and-so wrote this week, kind of made what was happening online matter more. So I think it's important to give it value.
Absolutely, I use exactly the same model, and it gives your students a chance to. Well, what I tend to do is I have a blog post that I have written for most of the pieces, or I'll write one, but often now at this point I have one written. So I did a class where we were talking about abundance all the way through, and it was sort of a theme that I was weaving through the different discussions we were doing and how that changes the learning process, and et cetera, et cetera. And then I have this very long, tedious blog post that I asked them to read afterwards and then reflect on sort of how the theme of abundance works. So you've got that face-to-face discussion, you introduce the concept, you warm it up, there's a reflection piece for them to look at later, and then the blog post comes after, and I find it to be a really nice way of continuously reinforcing those ideas and giving people a chance to return to the same thoughts and maybe develop them as they go along.
So that's interesting, Dave. So do the students read each other's blogs and comment on them, or do they pretty much just keep them as like personal journals where they just are reflecting on something?
Mine do. I would say half of the blog posts have comments on them. This year, I did not encourage anybody to comment. It's the first year I haven't. And I really tried to stay away from mandating specific ways in which people would collaborate. So I didn't tell them how to use Twitter. I just said help each other. And I didn't tell them to comment. I just said, that reading those will be really useful for you. Mm-hmm. And I found that, like, really a lot of people commented anyway, and I found that the comments I got were much more substantive. Because people, and 4 or 5 different people in their final reflection said, I read a lot of blog posts I didn't comment on, and every once in a while something struck me. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking that, now they may be pulling my leg.
They commented because they had something to say.
That's right.
Not because they had to post 4 comments.
That's right.
Or whatever.
That's right.
And I think Dave touched on another thing that is important, is the instructional materials being engageable online in a blended course. That, if you just show up and you blah, 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 PowerPoint slide, whatever, and then that's the only engagement that they have with the instructional material, it goes nowhere. But if you do the weekly video, or you record yourself in class, or you post your slides, or whatever you do, I have found that students will, because in class, they're having a tough day, they're fighting with their boyfriend. How much attention are they really paying? It varies. But if you give them a chance to re-engage with that content, that good things can happen as well.
Yeah, and I guess going back again to the early days of blogging, when I just felt I learned so much from blogging, but when I think back, I really didn't reply to people, and I didn't post comments that often. Maybe I would make my own post and then have a hyperlink back to whatever triggered my thought, probably at best. But I think we have this idea that this communication we have online is about quantity, and like you have to have, like you said, 3 posts or it doesn't count for participation credit. But sometimes just reading what other people are doing and seeing what other people's thoughts are to then help frame your own, it won't necessarily automatically come out in a reply post that we would grade or assess. So it could be happening and we're just not counting it correctly.
Well, and they could be in lots of different places, right? Your blog post could spark a Twitter conversation, or you're going to cross-post it to Facebook, and then you end up with a conversation over there that's not necessarily on the blog. So you could have it. These conversations come up in different ways and in different places from your different audiences.
Yeah. Can I ask my question now? The flip of that question. Let me flip it over. So when you have online students and you're trying to think of ways for them to get out in the real world and talk to real people, because that is a huge issue, at least I've found as a person teaching mainly virtually and with online students, is giving those opportunities to, as you say, have those times at like a coffee shop chat where you're sitting face to face with somebody and you can make eye contact. And
does it have to be with other students, or can they be just random people?
Well, I think anybody, having activities for them that require them to get out in the real world and experience something that you can't experience sitting in front of a computer. In the class that I taught was the consulting skills for instructional designers. So we wanted them to go out and try to solicit business or a client and identify a problem or a need. And yeah, you can do that to some extent, sending out emails or whatever, but sometimes that pounding of the pavement and sitting in front of a client and having them say to you, what do you know? And then you have to quickly on the fly say, well, here's what I can do for you, and have those types of conversations face to face is really an important part of then once you graduate going out in the real world. And I think a lot of times in online classes and online courses, those experiences aren't necessarily designed into their curriculum. Do you guys teach any online classes at all, like fully online where there's no face-to-face piece of it?
There's these MOOC things that I do that are certainly like that.
Wow, there's that. In a formal education setting, let's say, where like for credit at a...
She means real learning, Dave.
Yeah, real learning.
I understand. I got that message right away there. But I'd also like to know what happened to Jeff's coffee. They looked at it like it bit him.
It's almost empty. That's my problem.
Oh, that's very sad. But you teach fully online, Jeffy?
I do.
Yeah, so what's the difference? It's yours is fully online, Jeff? You have a mix?
I have
You
one
some
course. I'm teaching a grad call course online. And
Yeah,
most people
compare and
are
contrast it then a little bit.
most people don't want to meet face to face. You know, your stuff is more practicum based kind of thing. I don't have much to add, so I won't pretend. I'll reflect.
So
I'll write a blog post and get back to you.
So in the class that you're teaching, it would not be that there would not be any advantage to getting them to meet face to face or to meet with others outside the class.
I did have a face to face meeting the first week of class to help people orient them technically, and I have frequent hangouts to connect, but the face to face hasn't been an issue or hasn't been something I've addressed.
Yeah. That's interesting too, the difference between asynchronous and synchronous. Do you sometimes use that as a proxy for face-to-face?
I miss the synchronous because this course does not have a scheduled time, and so it's not like we're meeting Tuesdays at 6 p.m. and so there's no time I can get everybody together. And I would have planned things a little bit differently had I realized, because somehow the class feeling never evolved the way other online courses had when we had that weekly session to connect.
I think of synchronous learning anyhow as not being blended. I don't even think of it as online. I just realized that when I say blended learning, I think asynchronous learning.
Mm-hmm.
Because
yeah, I do too.
At the end of the day, if I've got to show up face to face to do whatever, I think of it as being embodied in some way. The fact that we're not actually in the same room together doesn't make a massive difference to me. The fact that because of the things that Jeff just said, you make that togetherness feeling, even though that's an online connection, that synchronous connection is very, very different than an asynchronous connection. Now you can't make asynchronous connections. It's just harder.
Which is why I go back to what I said originally. The group chatting has been, for me, depending on the course, but for my undergrads and stuff, has been the most vibrant area of blended learning. And it's got lots of functionality for me as a teacher. And it's good for them because when they have a question, they can just toss it out, and usually the other students will answer it. So group chats, yay. What else could you use? I mean, we still use Skype for our group chat. Have you used anything else? And Hangouts have it, but somehow it doesn't maintain that permanence as nicely as I'd like.
It doesn't. I've tried group Google Docs, which are a total nightmare no matter how I try to use them.
Yeah.
Every year I go, this year I'll get it, and I never get it because it's just not possible.
So you don't use Google Docs? You don't use Google Docs in a class?
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Chats.
I mean a group Google Doc is a continuous chat.
Oh, as a continuous chat. Okay, got it.
Because I have this idea that having all that in one place would be so awesome to refer back to, because you could just go to one document, hit Control F, find whatever it was you were looking for from whatever chat you'd had with whoever, because it would all be in one place. And I had this idea that could be really cool. It's just not a good idea.
Right.
Stop me from having it, but it's just not good.
Has anybody used Google Moderator?
I've never heard of
stuff
it.
like this?
Never heard of it. What is it?
Google.com/moderator.
What is he talking about?
Yeah.
I started using Google Keep last week, so.
What is it? Google.com/moderator?
Right. And I guess the idea is you can put questions in, and then they can be viewed, and you can submit answers. I think you can submit answers. It's usually used for something like a webinar where people can then ask questions and then others can vote them up and down, and then they can, something like this where people could ask questions and then we could choose them.
For example, this. Let me
Right,
find it.
exactly.
Like I'm putting one in the chat. We apparently used one for EdTech Weekly some
Did we
time
really?
ago. Yeah.
Well,
There
who
we,
knew?
who knew? Who knew? Does that come up? Trying to get it to come up.
It wasn't the whole.
Let's see if I can find the
It
right
didn't
link.
like the
Maybe I
slash.
link to them. Let's see. Yeah, we'll look
Peggy
that one
loves
up.
it, so it must be good. And Sheila in the chat room mentions listserv. Wow, I haven't used listserv in quite a while. And
You know, it's weird that there are some communities that uh, just settle on a tool and keep using the tool forever. Like I'm on a listserv in Ohio. We have a listserv for all of the tech directors for all of the public schools in the state, and it's just something that's been around for 20 years, and everybody's there, and they're used to it, and it's like us using Skype. There's no reason for us to use Skype for a chat except that that's where we are, and those are the tools that work, and people keep using them.
You know, it's funny. I'm reading through the comments in the text chat, and I think it's kind of maybe Jeffy what you said. People are they're breaking up with boyfriends. They didn't have dinner. They're hungry. Whatever. It was just hard to get students to try new things anyway. So if they're signing up for a face-to-face experience and suddenly you're making them do stuff online, that may be jarring. And hey, I didn't sign up for this. And same thing when you have an online class and you're suddenly saying, now I want you to do a bunch of stuff face-to-face. There's that. So sometimes you just have to take some of that with a grain of salt. Just try it. You'll like it or not, and then you can tell me you don't like it and you'll never have to do it again. But
I
sometimes
find
just try
terrifying.
stuff.
I find terrifying my students with a really complex learning contract the first week really useful for that. Because by the time my students make it through the learning contract, because their first blog post is reflect on the learning contract, and then they come back to like, there's so many things, and what are they talking about? And after that, they're just everything is uphill from there.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter what I ask them to do. It's like at least it's not the learning contract.
And that actually might be the answer. It's like just zone out. Don't listen to them. Just hit them with everything, and then when they start to complain, just ignore it.
Actually, frankly, that's my whole pedagogical style right there. And you can look through the final, not that you would, but the final replies of my students. Over half of them said, I don't even remember the first 2 weeks. And we're just so totally, but I find the deep end is the place to start a student. And then you claw them back from there. Because from that, I understand that most people don't agree with me about this. But I just find it such a much easier way of working, where you say, look, are we going to waste our time or not? And at first, people seem willing to say, yeah, we're not going to waste our time, and then they regret having said that later. But you've got them on side for the nastiness.
And it is
the
kind of
painful
funny
learning process.
with especially with this little group talking about this, because there's probably not much that we wouldn't try for a tool for learning to give it a whirl. At least we've tried most things. So it is sort of hard. Like, for example, at a class this semester, when you said Google Docs, David, it made me think, almost every live class session I have where we use a web conferencing tool, I set up a Google Doc on the side for various reasons. Usually there's some type of like breakout group or whatever. And the student just freaked out. I don't understand. How can I be in this window talking to you live, and then I'm going to be over here on this other window? Even just the idea of having two tabs open in a session, and we forget that, and so then it does become an issue. Do I, suddenly go, oh wow, I'm so ahead of the curve on what I'm willing to do that I need to back it off, and then you back it off too far, or you just plow forward and say, tough. You're going to do it, and you're going to like it. Or not.
It is a different skill set, though. I mean, it's something that they're not used to doing and that they haven't had to do elsewhere, right? I mean, it was difficult for me 2 months ago, and we did it for years. It was just, oh, wait, there's other things going on, too, and I forgot there's a chat. I should probably pay attention to that.
Right.
That you have to do it and try it and know that you're going to do it poorly for a while.
Mm-hmm.
So if we come anywhere close to answering what the original question was?
I absolutely think we did. Good job, Jen.
Yeah.
Any thoughts about our question for IHAQ number 10?
Didn't we say we just had one in the chat room at the start of the show?
I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention.
I don't think so.
Can you restate that, please, Dave?
I don't remember. Somebody just said there was a question in the chat room.
There was a
No, it wasn't.
jokey question.
Yeah, it wasn't a real question.
Well, we'll come up with it by Tuesday.
We will.
I have a reminder in my calendar.
We're going to help Jeff.
Right. And if people want us to ask questions, we're trying to use the IHAQ hashtag, correct? So
that is correct.
We can aggregate that way.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Yep. Sounds good. Yay.
Okay, Jen.
I love my new MacBook Pro, by the way. And I'm sorry, John, that you have to live in a Windows environment that you hate. Are you okay with that?
I am learning a lot about Windows 8.1 lately.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, thanks, everyone, for joining us. And is next week 10? Did we make it to 10?
10. We made it to 10.
We were going to do something at 10, like consider our interface or something, weren't we? If we made it to 10? That was some milestone, I believe.
No.
Oh, okay. We'll give Jeffy a nice...
when we get the 4 digits show numbers, then we can talk.
Okay. Let's give Jeffy a nice out point. Thanks, everybody. See you next week.
Oh, lovely out point there, Jen.
Nice.
You can cut out that other part to let us today. This is so fun. I love chatting with you guys. I'm so glad we're doing it again.
And thank you, everybody, for coming, even though we didn't post event announcements.
Or probably answer the question.
Wow, yeah. And I don't know how much you were following along. Vanessa's got a really tough situation there with issues with connectivity and skill sets and prerequisite skills, and she's just really fighting an uphill battle, it looks like.
Yeah.
Actually, that would be a really interesting one to do, because we've alluded to it a couple of times here. But what do you do when the skill sets of the learners are really, really low?
Or really, really different.
Those are two totally different questions, though.
Yeah, I get
which
that.
one do you want to do?
I think low would be the first one.
I bet we could do even though they're different, I bet we could do them in the same show.
You just have to hijack it and make it your own.
I'm trying to save them for later.
That's a good strategy.
Just trying to get back to 30 seconds per topic.
Okay, so how do we deal with very low level technology people in using internet things?
With
IHAQ number 10.
Would those be digital natives? Can we get through the whole thing without saying the words digital native?
Don't start with me, young lady.
Or, to quote Steger, how can you expect your students to be 21st century learners if you haven't learned anything in the 21st century?
Okay, that's going to be the sub-question.
I see. Once we start quoting Gary Steger, it's time to go away.
It's time to be done. Yeah, I know.
Time to be done. Enjoy your long work day, Jeffy.
Yeah, sorry, Jeffy.
Hey, it's not a bad week. This is Wednesday is Election Day and Friday is Memorial Day. So I have Thursdays off, so it's a 2-day work week, so I can't complain.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Good for you. Last week of school for us.
Job satisfaction.
Oh, you have to go on Monday for one day? Because of that snow situation? Would you have been out earlier, you mean?
Oh, what?
You have to go on Monday?
No, our kids are done Thursday. Our staff is done Friday. Last week of school.
Oh, last week. I think they said last day.
Right. And then I have to go for 2 more weeks.
We have a lot of people around here who have like goofy endings because of snow days.
Yeah, a lot of that here too.
I thought that's what you were talking about. Oh, 40-year-old GED grads in first-year community colleges. Oh, okay. Yeah, these are some good. I'm going to go through the text chat. I bet we can summarize some of this too. Okay, we'll help Jeff out. Yay. Okay, have fun, everybody.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.